Welcome back to What the Fertility Season 3. Today we have Minerva from London, England on with us. She will be sharing her journey of infertility, which includes recurrent early miscarriage, uterine polyps, and Asherman syndrome. Welcome.
Hi, I'm so excited. How are you?
We're good. We're so excited to have you on. I feel like to have people on from like all across like the world is just the coolest thing. So thank you for being here. We're so excited.
Yeah, yeah, honestly, I'm very excited. I love, love, love your podcast. And honestly, you guys are an absolute inspiration. So
Oh, that means
love what you're doing.
oh, well, thank you. Well, really, we'll just kind of give you the floor. So if you want to just jump on in and kind of tell us how it all even began and where it started.
Yeah, so I guess it all really started with the birth of my son. So I was actually taking part in the COVID vaccine maternal study way back when, coronavirus was a thing. It was actually the clinical trial team who flagged that my son was a footling breech, which I had no idea about. This was about a week or two before my due date. The midwife hadn't flagged it at all. It was too late to try and turn him. He was already a 9-pound baby. And so I was scheduled in for a C-section a few days later. And obviously I was happy to take doctor's advice. My priority was getting a healthy baby at the end of it. And as far as the pregnancy and delivery were concerned, everything went by without a hitch. It was all a big success. Nothing to note. So fast forward to when I got my periods back, there wasn't much blood and I was getting a lot of pain. And obviously, this is my first baby. I had no idea what to expect when, my periods came back. But unfortunately, it was a really quite excruciating pain. And I can definitely go into like a lot more of the symptoms that I was getting as we go along, just to help your listeners with this. I got my periods back. They were very painful, and there was basically no blood. Obviously, things are probably different in the US, but in the UK, we have the NHS. So first port of call, go to the NHS. I was saying, look, I've had a C-section, I've had a baby, but things aren't normal. Things aren't what they, were before I had my son. But I went to them 3 times. Each time with the same symptoms, just really, really painful and no blood, really. There was blood, but only for a day. And same symptoms, but they just said, what do you expect? You've had a C-section, things are going to take a little while to come back to what they were before. And even got to the point where on my 3rd appointment, they basically sent me the kind of web page for periods, and pointed out, periods can be painful, as if I didn't know,
Oh my
that
God,
periods can be
like,
painful.
I've had periods for how many years?
I was like, yeah, exactly. Like, periods are not a new thing to me. That I guess kind of felt a bit insulting. But then coinciding with that, in a 9-month period, I'd had 3 recurrent miscarriages, early miscarriages between 8 to 10 weeks. So when it got to the 3rd one, which was, the 3rd one especially was a really quite painful miscarriage, and I thought I was going to have to go into A&E, accident and emergency. I don't know what you call it in the US.
I'm laughing, and I think a lot of our listeners might feel this way too. I will say that when I was going through early loss, the NHS and A&E, all of that online is really the only support that you find. And so like, I'm super familiar with that because that was like the online support that I found, and America doesn't have anything like that.
Right. Yeah. So, I felt like I was hitting like a lot of dead ends with the NHS, and don't get me wrong, like very grateful for the NHS. Do not take it for granted, but its strength really is emergency care, of which this wasn't really deemed, fertility, things like that aren't really deemed to be, an emergency. So once I'd had that 3rd miscarriage and just my periods were just getting more and more painful, I basically went private. I just thought enough is enough. I'm going to have to just bite the bullet and go privately. And so, and the thing is, I would have probably tolerated all of the pain and just taken the doctor's word for it if it hadn't been for the miscarriages. So I think, you know, I was just thinking, hey, this is what periods are like after you give birth. This is what I'm being told by doctors. Then I'm just going to have to take their word for it. But because it coincided with the miscarriages and the fertility issues, it was, you know, alarm bells were definitely ringing.
Wait, so
so
how long after your son now has this been?
Sorry, yes. So he's 2.5 now.
Okay,
Yeah.
and then so when you had the miscarriages, it was like a year
So
after, or
yeah. So like between a year and 1 to 2 years, basically.
Wow. And the
Yeah.
physicians were never saying like, okay, you're having this loss and you're having these like
Nothing.
non-bleeding. They just didn't connect the two at all.
No, nothing. Yeah. And I just felt like I was going crazy, to be perfectly honest.
Sure.
So I went privately, and within a week I was in surgery. And basically what he saw on the scan was a lot of calcification on the inside of my uterus. It was taking up about 20% of the, you know, overall lining was full of retained product, and that could have been from, you know, my son's placenta, or it could have been from the miscarriages I'd had. It was unclear, or a combination of both. I don't know. And yeah, so we saw lots of calcification, and my uterus lining was about like 3.5 millimeters, which you probably know is quite, and that was on like, you know, mid-cycle. So that's really low. It should be like 8, 9 plus around that time. So it was very low. So he just said, look, we're going to have to go in and remove these anyway. Let's not rule out that we're going to also find some adhesions based on just the evidence that, you know, you're telling me you're getting all this pain, light periods, and then as well with the, you know, thin uterus lining that he was seeing. And yeah, as expected, went into surgery the following week. And yeah, so lots of adhesions that luckily he was able to divide. And yeah, so I came out of that feeling just very positive. Felt like I'd, you know, got another chance of having a sibling for my son. Yeah, so you know, had the coil. You might be aware that, you know, you have the coil fitted after you have adhesions divided, just to try and stop. Actually, I think in the US, some physicians might do like a balloon.
Yeah, that's what I'm more familiar with, where they just kind of like to keep it open so they don't reconnect, right?
Yeah, exactly. So I mean,
I know nothing about any of this, so please explain it to me, because I'm like, it went over my head.
So I think there's different ways that they can try and stop the adhesions from reforming right away. And the annoying thing, I should mention that obviously the diagnosis for, you know, these adhesions is Asherman's, and it can recur. Yeah, unfortunately, once you kind of have Asherman's, it's a bit of a lifelong journey now.
Oh, really? I didn't realize it could. So can you, for listeners, explain, I guess, like just a description of what Asherman's is and what potentially causes it?
Yeah, for sure. So Asherman's is essentially scar tissue that forms on the inside of the uterus and or the cervix. And I guess things you'd be looking out for is if you've had like medical management of anything. So it could be a D&C, could be a C-section. And I think they say it's a relatively rare condition, but I genuinely think it's just underdiagnosed. That is genuinely what I think.
They say 1% of women, and you're our third person in 2.5 seasons to have been diagnosed with it.
Yeah. I genuinely think, and everyone has different symptoms. Like, yeah. So I listened to the episode Lisa McCarty. Is that who you had on? Yes. Yeah. So I think she had just a very different experience to me with it, and I think my symptoms, I'll go over them now actually, just one by one, just because I think these are very clear symptoms that I think they're very different to period pain. So anyway, let me go for it. So the first thing I noticed was a sharp pain. So whenever I sat down, especially when I was on my period, but also sometimes kind of mid-cycle around ovulation, I would get a really sharp pain kind of up through, you know, my pelvic area. And quite unmistakably, you know, a sharp pain. And then again, during my period, pain all around my pelvic area, and especially, and this is very specific, like when I'm emptying my bladder, and especially my first, wee of the day, was especially painful, to the point where I felt like I was going to pass out, which is such a strange, symptom.
So,
Which
when you were diagnosed, did they give a reason for those symptoms being that, like, for that pain? Like, why, I guess, physiologically is that?
Good question. I actually genuinely do not know, but it must have something to do with just like your uterus contracting during your period, and then your bladder filling, and then I don't know.
Because I guess it's just like a rubber band that's not stretchy anymore, or as stretchy.
Yeah, exactly. Because obviously, like, pelvic pain is very typical of Asherman's, but I'm being very specific about the kind of pain that I get with it,
which is helpful.
and that completely went away as soon as I had that first operation, my first period, pain-free, and I'm telling you, absolutely pain-free.
That's insane. Oh my goodness.
Yeah, which was amazing. So obviously that kind of pain is what I had, and then light to non-existent periods, and then just difficulty getting pregnant, staying pregnant, and then thin uterus lining, which obviously is shown on a scan. So they were like the main symptoms. So obviously I was feeling really hopeful after that. And there was a few months where my uterus lining, probably about 3 months, where my uterus lining had gone back up, obviously with the help of medications, estrogen.
Well, I was gonna say, at this point, so now you have this, are you now kind of like going down like some medicated routes for fertility because of this?
Oh yes. So I'll get there. So I was kind of hoping that once we'd got to recording this podcast that I'd have some really positive news. But unfortunately this week I've had bad news again, in that the Asherman's has come back.
Oh,
so
wow.
it's going to be another round of like an operation, hysteroscopy, to divide the adhesions, and then we will now be going forward with some sort of assisted reproductive methods, probably IVF.
Right.
We know now that I guess my window before they reform is around 2 to 3 months of like healthy uterus lining, and then it starts going downhill from there.
Okay, that's what I was going to ask, because I didn't know after like surgery how long is like kind of that window you have. So you said 2 to 3 months.
Yeah. So that's once you get the coil out. So once I had the coil out, there was about 2 to 3 months. And then it just started wearing down again. Now it's back to below 4 millimeters.
Okay, I have a lot of questions, or I guess comments here. Okay, so the very first one, you went through your symptoms, and I know I got a little attached to the pain and why that was. But the reason I'm so familiar with Asherman's is because of the early reoccurrent loss. And that is because when the embryo implants into the uterus, right, they're implanting into almost like, please correct me, but is it like dead tissue, or just not really like healthy tissue that the embryo is implanting into?
Yeah, I think it's just not healthy. Because even now, my, like, I think you call them OBs, my gynecologist, said that technically he wouldn't drop his hat if I got pregnant, because there are tiny patches of good lining. Well, I say good, they're still only 4 millimeters, but at least there is a small chance that if the egg implants in those small areas, but it's broken. So if you think of like a uterus lining being like a full circle, when you have Asherman's, because there's bands of scar tissue going from one side to the next, it's broken.
So it's like, it's already really difficult to get pregnant for anybody, really. And then you add on top, okay, now you only have like 25% of the surface area that will actually implant. Okay. I forgot what else I was going to ask. This is just like, to your point, it's super undiagnosed. And I think that's what I was going to ask. So in your case, it was likely from the medical management of the C-section from your son. Is that?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, 100%. And I think now we're just at a crossroads, really. Like, how much do we want to grow our family, have another sibling for, a sibling for our son, and kind of how much money do we want to throw at it? That's kind of the crossroads that we're now at, where, if the first round fails, then I get the Ashermans again, and then we have to get another operation, then IVF again. It's going to be a long road, I think.
Now, I do have a question. So obviously you said it has come back. Now, does all those symptoms that you had prior, did that also then come back?
Yep. And that's how I knew. I knew before I went into that appointment, because I was getting, the same, like, emptying my bladder first thing in the morning was painful. And I knew straight away that the appointment wasn't going to go well. So yeah, it's very frustrating, but I've now sort of over the last, so it's now been nearly 2 years of us trying. 1 year since my first hysteroscopy, but 2 years of us trying, completely, including the miscarriages, etc. And I've now, like, over the years, building a team of kind of people who can help, which I think is so important, and that I would recommend to anyone. I've got my acupuncturist, my therapist, my gynecologist, of which I'm now going to have another one because I'm being forwarded on to a specialist in Asherman, which I'm quite excited about in a weird way.
That's
I'm
really
a member
neat.
of the
So it's like a Asherman specialist for GYN. I actually haven't heard of that in the States.
I know, I haven't either. That's really cool.
I think there's 2 of them in the UK, and luckily one of them is right by us.
Oh, wow, that's incredible.
Yeah, so I'm going to be seeing him soon, and hopefully he'll give us kind of a good outlook of what it's going to look like to have another baby, if that's what we want to kind of do. And I'm a member of, like, Asherman's Facebook groups now, and there's so many success stories on there that I love to kind of read. Although some people on there have had 11 operations to get there. So yeah.
Wow. And the operation, I heard you say it's a hysteroscopy. And I think a lot of people going through infertility have, like, exploratory hysteroscopies.
Right.
So they're probably familiar, but typically, are you at least put to sleep for these? Okay.
Yeah. I think they want you to be totally still, because obviously if they perforate your uterus, then it's not going to be great.
Which something, and maybe you can or maybe you can't answer this, but something I've always found interesting about Asherman's is the cause of it is surgery. And the only way to fix it is surgery. So have they commented on, like, anything like that? Or they're just like, look, we're going to be very careful?
Well, so they removed most of the uterine polyps that I had as well. Also the calcification, the retained product, but actually there was some that they can't remove because it would require really digging into the lining. So they are very careful when they go in for that hysteroscopy. They kind of do what they can without kind of traumatizing your your uterus even more than it kind of has been. But it's not, weirdly, like, Asherman's isn't something, when they have you sign the paperwork for your C-section, that's just not something that is mentioned or even spoken about with your doctor.
Which is wild, because I will say, so I had to have a DNC for one of my losses, and it actually is on that paperwork, which is it is. And so that was where I was, because I had so many, right? Like, as you did too, I just had them back to back, and it's like, do I have 6 DNCs, or because I am understanding of, like, what Asherman's can do I choose an alternative route? But I also have never heard of it being a C-section, something they
wasn't talked to me at all.
Yeah,
I had a C-section, and I know. The only reason I know about it is just from, like, you guys on her show, and I've never heard of it prior to that. It was not discussed at all.
I feel like it is just, very unlucky, because I have so many friends who've had C-sections and just gone on to, have the perfect, second child, and, like, a really good experience. It's just annoying that, I have to be that unlucky one.
I'm sorry.
It's such a long road, it sounds like, too, for just the reoccurrence. So you're really in a situation of, like, secondary infertility at this point. What does, I don't know if you can kind of shed light on, like, I guess, trying for your first son that you have versus now the emotional process
Yeah, I guess I just felt very naive having my son now. Like actually a chemical miscarriage, nothing like the miscarriage I've had since then. The first month we tried, and then off the back of that, the second month we had my son. So I genuinely just thought we would go into trying for a second, just in the same way, I just look at my husband and it would happen.
Yeah.
But yeah, it hasn't been that way. And yeah, so my OB is now using the term, secondary infertility, which is a scary term, which I don't like. I don't like it being used.
Yeah.
But
I
it
bet.
feels so final. You can come back from it. So even though, technically I am classed, as secondary, with the secondary infertility, yeah, I'm hoping that with a few more operations, I can come back and have this second baby.
I think it's beautiful that you know that your body can carry a pregnancy to term and you can deliver. And so that is like so hopeful in your situation.
Fingers crossed. Yeah, I'm really hoping, to be honest. Yeah, let's see. Let's see. I feel like hindsight's a wonderful thing, to be honest.
Isn't it?
I might
Isn't
in a year I might be looking back and saying, oh, well, of course I was never going to have a second one with my diagnosis. Or I could be looking back and being like, of course it was going to happen. Why wouldn't it?
Absolutely. I think so. Like, speaking of hindsight, right? So you've been on this journey now 2 years specific to your new diagnosis. Would you have advice for maybe a listener that has been diagnosed with this recently or is having the symptoms that you've started to have?
Yes, good question. Yeah, so I would definitely just say, if they're getting pain, and especially the kind of pain, because it's not like menstrual cramps, this is a very different kind of sharp, radiating kind of pain. At least I can only speak from my personal experience, I suppose. But yeah, if they're getting any kind of unusual pain that's not like what they had before, and it's actually quite hard to remember what your periods were before you had a baby, but there was just like a feeling that something was off, then definitely question it. Yeah, it's just like what everyone always says. I've listened to so many fertility podcasts now, like obviously including your own. And it's just advocate for yourself. I know everyone always says that, like, advocate for yourself, but I really probably should have pushed harder with the NHS, knowing that, this isn't right. I shouldn't be nearly passing out going for to the bathroom in the morning. It was like, when you've got pain and it kind of makes you dizzy because it's so that's the kind of pain I was getting. And I have to say, the second time now it's come back, obviously this is the first month that it's back. It's not as bad, but I imagine if I left it, it's gonna build and build. So what I would say, yeah, if you're getting pain, make sure you advocate for yourself. Know your own body. Everyone knows their own body better than anyone else. Watch out for the symptoms. Better to be safe than sorry. Build a team. I feel like that's so important, to get a team, a support network, because my acupuncturist is genuinely like a second therapist.
I shared the same thing for me. I was like, she is it for me. I lay on that table and she gets it all.
It's so true though, because when you're going through, I don't know what it's like in the US, but definitely my OB is very he's very, he's got a medical mind. He's very so he's very clinical with the way he describes things, and which is great. He's very matter of fact, but with an acupuncturist, it's that kind of human element that a lot of the time is lost when you're going through kind of the medical route of with fertility.
I couldn't have said that better. And they also kind of like put you back on track of like, okay, I know that you're in such a rush and such a hurry, but they can kind of speak like
slow
that.
down.
Slow down language.
That's so true. And even just lifestyle, like my acupuncturist, she's very good, like, around ovulation, she's like, make sure you're eating your beetroot, make sure you're eating your pomegranate, make sure you're eating your Brazil nuts.
Yes.
It's just those like little reminders that you need.
Well,
That's
it
amazing.
sounds like your journey is far from over. And I think you've done a phenomenal job for listeners explaining what Asherman's is, how it can be caused, symptoms to look out for. I think Amanda and I both would love to have you on, maybe like you said,
Yes.
the next 12 months to kind of
Yes,
see
for
where you're
sure.
at on your journey. And I think you had some really good advice for listeners. Is there any additional information you want to share in regards to anything you've been diagnosed with or your experience?
No, I think that's covered it. But yeah, I would definitely love to be able to share a post-Asherman success story with you because, yeah, like basically a pregnancy is the best kind of cure for Asherman's because as soon as you're pregnant, the scar tissue can't form. So I hope to be able to, yeah, have a positive story to kind of look back on. But thanks so much anyway for you guys for spreading awareness, and yeah, everything you do. Yeah, and helping everyone just navigate the minefield, the fertility minefield.
I couldn't have said it better. Well, thank you so much for being on with us. We really enjoyed hearing your story.